He walked into the hospital room with his pregnant mistress by his side, ready to announce the divorce to his sick wife. But a single sentence from the nurse sent him into a panic instantly. "You once told me the only lies worth telling are the ones we tell ourselves," Eleanor Bishop whispered, her gaze fixed on the antique mirror hanging in their bedroom. Her fingers traced the ornate silver frame, lingering on a small crack in the corner, a flaw in an otherwise perfect piece. "Doctor." Mercer Bishop looked up from his laptop, the blue light casting shadows across his angular face. The night was silent, except for the faint beeping of medical equipment that had become the heartbeat of their Westchester County home. "I was quoting Fitzgerald," he said, closing his computer. "I didn't realize you'd hold on to it all these years." Eleanor's reflection smiled back at her, a paler, thinner version of the woman who had once commanded lecture halls full of eager literature students. "Some things stick with you, especially the truths we don't want to face." Mercer crossed the room, his movements carrying the precision of a man who operated on human brains for a living. At 43, the premature grey at his temples only enhanced his authoritative presence. Colleagues at Memorial Hospital often joked that his patients trusted him before he even spoke, something about the unwavering confidence in his posture. "You should rest," he said, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Tomorrow's a big day." Eleanor leaned back against him, their eyes meeting in the mirror. 12 years of marriage reflected back at them, a timeline of memories, arguments, reconciliations, and now, illness. "I've been resting for 8 months, she replied, a hint of her former sharpness breaking through. "I used to lecture on Joyce for 3 hours straight without losing my breath. Now folding laundry feels like running a marathon." The multiple sclerosis diagnosis had been delivered with clinical detachment by a colleague of Mercer's. Advanced and aggressive, the words had hung in the sterile hospital room like unwelcome guests who refused to leave. Eleanor had nodded, asked intelligent questions, requested medical journals. Mercer had stood frozen, the doctor in him understanding the prognosis, while the husband in him refused to process it. "Dr. Bishop?" a soft voice called from the doorway. They both turned to see Sage Morgan, Eleanor's private nurse. With her copper hair pulled back in a messy bun and bright green eyes that seemed perpetually alert, Sage brought an energy into the room that had been missing for months. "It's time for the evening medications," she said, entering with a tray of neatly arranged pills. "And I've prepared a light dinner downstairs if you're feeling up to it, Mrs. Bishop." "Eleanor," she corrected gently, as she did every day. "Please call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," Sage repeated with a smile that reached her eyes. "You're looking stronger today." Mercer released his wife's shoulders and stepped back, watching as Sage helped Eleanor to her medication. There was something effortless about the way the nurse moved around their bedroom, a space that had once been exclusively theirs. In just 2 months, Sage had learned every corner of their lives. Which cabinet held the good scotch, which floorboards creaked, how Eleanor took her tea on good days and bad. "I'll head down and warm up dinner," Mercer said, feeling suddenly like an outsider in his own home. As he turned to leave, he caught Sage's eyes briefly, a moment too long to be completely professional. Downstairs in the kitchen, Mercer poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. The house was different now. Medical equipment in the living room, grab bars in the bathroom, a stair lift installed last month when Eleanor could no longer manage the steps. Their perfectly calculated life had been reduced to a series of accommodations. The sound of Sage's footsteps on the stairs was becoming familiar, lighter than Eleanor's used to be, but purposeful. "She's not coming down," Sage announced, entering the kitchen. The fatigue hit suddenly. "I've gotten her comfortable for the night." Mercer nodded, taking a long sip of his drink. "Thank you, you've been invaluable." "It's my job, Dr. Bishop." "Mercer," he said, echoing his wife's earlier correction. "After 2 months of living under the same roof, I think we're past formalities." Sage smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Mercer, then." She moved around the kitchen with the same ease she showed upstairs, heating a plate in the microwave and setting it before him. "You need to eat. Doctors make the worst patients, but they also make the worst caretakers. When was the last time you had a full meal?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked about his needs? He'd become so accustomed to his role, the dedicated husband, the brilliant surgeon, the pillar of strength, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as simply human. "I can't remember," he admitted. "That's what I thought," Sage said, sitting across from him with her own plate. "Eat. Doctor's orders." For the first time in months, Mercer laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to startle them both. They ate in comfortable silence. From that night forward, these late dinners became a ritual. Eleanor asleep upstairs, Mercer and Sage in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. Her father's battle with Parkinson's that had inspired her nursing career, his childhood in Boston before medicine called him to New York, books they'd both read, movies neither had time to see. "You never talk about children," Sage observed one night, 3 weeks into their new routine. "Most of my patients' families have strong opinions on the subject. Either they have kids who never visit, or they regret not having them." Mercer swirled the ice in his glass. "It was a mutual decision early in our marriage. Eleanor was building her academic career. I was establishing my practice. The timing never seemed right. And now?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. "Now everything is different," he said finally. As April turned to May, Eleanor had more bad days than good. Sage's presence became even more essential, her vibrant energy a counterbalance to the heaviness that pervaded the house. Mercer found himself lingering in rooms where she worked, making excuses to be home between surgeries. One evening he returned early to find Sage reading aloud to Eleanor in the sunroom, Wolfe's To the Lighthouse, one of Eleanor's favorites. He paused in the doorway, watching as his wife closed her eyes, transported by the familiar words delivered in Sage's melodic voice. Something tightened in his chest, guilt, longing, a complex emotion he couldn't name. "Don't stop on my account," he said, entering the room. Eleanor opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "Sage has a gift. She makes the words come alive." "My mother was an English teacher," Sage explained, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Literature was our religion." "Then you're in good company," Mercer said, gesturing to his wife. "Eleanor once made an entire lecture hall cry with her reading of The Dead. Joyce's finest work," Eleanor added, her academic passion momentarily overriding her fatigue. "The snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling like the descent of their last end upon all the living and the dead." The quote hung in the air between them. Sage closed the book gently. "I should prepare your evening medications," she said, standing. As she passed Mercer in the doorway, their shoulders brushed, a contact that lasted less than a second but sent an electric current through him. Later that night, unable to sleep, Mercer found himself drawn to the kitchen. Sage was there as if she'd been waiting, a cup of tea cooling before her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Occupational hazard. Too many years of being on call." She pushed a second cup toward him. "I made enough for two, just in case." Their late-night conversations grew deeper. Mercer found himself sharing thoughts he'd never vocalized, fears about Eleanor's prognosis, frustrations with the limitations of medical science, the isolation of being both doctor and husband. "You know what's hardest?" he confessed one night. "When she looks at me, she sees both her doctor and her husband. I can't just be one or the other." "And what do you see when you look at her?" Sage asked. The question stopped him. What did he see? The brilliant professor he'd fallen in love with, the patient with a degenerative condition, the woman whose needs now structured his entire life. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. As Eleanor's 40th birthday approached, Mercer threw himself into planning a celebration. It needed to be perfect, intimate enough for her comfort, but special enough to mark the milestone. For the first time in months, he felt purposeful outside the operating room. The day arrived with unexpected sunshine after a week of spring rain. Close friends gathered in their backyard, colleagues from the university, a few of Mercer's hospital associates, Eleanor's sister and brother-in-law. Eleanor herself sat in a new wheelchair, looking more like her former self than she had in months, dressed in a blue silk blouse that matched her eyes. Mercer watched her from across the garden, laughing with her former department chair. For a moment, he could almost pretend things were normal. "You did well," Sage said, appearing beside him with 2 champagne flutes. "She's happy today." "Thank you," he said, accepting the glass, "for everything. This wouldn't have happened without you." "That's not true," she replied, her green eyes serious. "You love her, that's enough." But was it? The question echoed in his mind as he watched his wife. Was love enough when everything else had changed so fundamentally? The party was in full swing when it happened. Eleanor was opening gifts when suddenly her hand froze mid-air. Mercer recognized the signs immediately, the slight tension in her jaw, the unfocused gaze. Within seconds, he was at her side, just as the seizure took hold. The guests fell silent as Mercer and Sage moved with practiced efficiency, clearing space, protecting Eleanor from injury, timing the episode. It lasted 2 minutes and 17 seconds, an eternity for everyone watching, a clinical data point for Mercer's doctor brain. As the last guest departed with worried glances and whispered concerns, Mercer carried his semi-conscious wife upstairs. Sage followed with medication and water, helping position Eleanor comfortably in their bed. "This isn't how I wanted today to go," Eleanor murmured drowsily as the medication took effect. "Birthdays are overrated," Mercer said, trying for lightness. "Next year we'll skip straight to the cake." A small smile touched her lips before she drifted to sleep. Mercer sat beside her until her breathing deepened, then quietly left the room. He found Sage in the kitchen, cleaning up the last remnants of the party. Wine glasses lined the counter, waiting to be washed. Half-eaten cake sat on a crystal platter, "Happy 40th Eleanor," written in elegant blue script. "She'll be asleep for hours," Sage said, reading the unasked question on his face. "The post-seizure medication always knocks her out." Mercer nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the medical crisis had faded, leaving him hollow. He sank into a chair at the kitchen island. "I've never seen you look so tired," Sage observed, placing a glass of wine in front of him. "I am tired," he admitted. "So damn tired." "Of what?" "Everything. Nothing." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know anymore. Being strong, being reliable, being enough." Sage rounded the island slowly, coming to stand before him. "You're more than enough, Mercer, you always have been." She reached out, her fingers lightly touching his cheek, a gesture so unexpected, so gentle, that he couldn't pull away. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" she whispered. The question broke something inside him, a dam he'd built carefully over months of strain and responsibility. Before he could formulate an answer, Sage leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For one heartbeat, Mercer remained frozen, his mind racing through all the reasons this was wrong. Then, like a man drowning, he pulled her closer, returning the kiss with an intensity that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, breathless, reality came crashing back. His wife was asleep upstairs, his wife who was fighting for her life, who needed him now more than ever. "We can't," he said, standing abruptly. I can't do this." Sage stepped back, her expression unreadable. "I understand. It won't happen again." But even as he nodded and retreated from the kitchen, Mercer knew it was a lie. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. In that moment, looking at Sage with her flushed cheeks and bright eyes so full of life, he felt something he hadn't in months. Desire, possibility, a future not defined by illness. As he climbed the stairs to the bedroom he shared with his sleeping wife, guilt and anticipation warred within him. He had spent his entire career making life-or-death decisions with unwavering confidence. Now facing a moral crossroads rather than a medical one, he found himself utterly lost. 3 weeks after Eleanor's birthday, Mercer found himself lingering in his office at Memorial Hospital long after his last surgery. The familiar rhythm of patient rounds and administrative meetings provided a structure that his home life now lacked. Here, he was still Dr. Bishop, respected, competent, in control. "How you're avoiding going home," said a voice from his doorway. Mercer looked up to see Dr. Griffin Walsh leaning against the frame, white coat slung over one shoulder. At 45, Griffin was one of the top oncologists on the East Coast, with a reputation for brutal honesty that sometimes bordered on cruelty. "Just catching up on paperwork," Mercer replied, gesturing to the files spread across his desk. Griffin laughed, a short sound without humor. "Right. Because neurosurgeons are known for their dedication to documentation." He entered without invitation, dropping into the chair opposite Mercer. "How's Eleanor?" The question wasn't merely polite. Griffin had been the one to diagnose Eleanor's MS after her initial symptoms were dismissed by 2 other specialists. He'd become a fixture in their lives, since occasionally stopping by the house with journal articles on experimental treatments. "Stable. The birthday episode was severe, but she's recovered well." Griffin nodded, and the nurse, the redhead with the impressive credentials. Something protective flared in Mercer's chest. "Sage is excellent. Eleanor trusts her implicitly." "I bet she does," Griffin said with a knowing smile. "And you?" Mercer kept his expression neutral. "She's been a godsend for our household." "I'd imagine so." Griffin stood, straightening his tie. Listen, a bunch of us are heading to Sullivan's. Come join us. You look like you could use a drink with adults who aren't your patients or your staff. The invitation was tempting. A few hours of normalcy, of being just another doctor unwinding after a long day. I can't, Mercer said finally. Eleanor's expecting me. Eleanor has her nurse, Griffin countered, his tone gentle despite the bluntness of his words. You're allowed to breathe, Mercer. Martyrdom won't cure her. The words hit with precision, targeting the guilt Mercer carried like a second skin. Griffin had always possessed an uncanny ability to verbalize the thoughts others kept hidden. One drink, Mercer conceded, shutting down his computer. One drink turned into 3. By the time Mercer called a car service to take him home, it was past midnight. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen, their signal that Eleanor was asleep and all was well. Sage was waiting at the kitchen island, a medical journal open before her. She looked up when he entered, her expression shifting from concentration to something warmer. You should have called, she said, closing the journal. I was worried. I'm sorry. I got caught up with colleagues. She studied him with those perceptive green eyes. Griffin Walsh, among others. How did you know? He called earlier, looking for you. Said something about making sure you didn't bail on drinks. She stood, gathering her things. Eleanor had a good day. We spent the afternoon in the garden. She read for almost an hour. The normalcy of the report made Mercer's chest ache. This was their routine now. Updates on his wife's condition like weather reports, cataloguing good days to steel themselves against the bad. Thank you, he said, taking a step toward her, for taking such good care of her. Sage looked up at him, her face open and vulnerable in the soft kitchen light. It's not just her I care about, Mercer. The admission hung between them, an echo of the kiss they'd both been pretending hadn't happened. Mercer knew he should step back, establish professional boundaries, remember his wedding vows. Instead, he closed the distance between them. This time there was no hesitation. His mouth found hers with desperate certainty, hands tangling in her copper hair. She responded with equal fervor, pressing against him as if trying to absorb his very essence. We shouldn't, he murmured against her neck, even as his hands slid beneath her shirt. I know, she whispered back, already working at his belt. They made love against the kitchen counter, quick and urgent, as if time might run out at any moment. Afterward, surrounded by the evidence of their transgression, discarded clothing, disheveled hair, the scent of sex hanging in the air, reality crashed back with devastating clarity. Eleanor's upstairs, Mercer said, the words hollow in his own ears. Sage nodded, already putting herself back together with practiced efficiency. This won't happen again, she said, echoing their words from 3 weeks ago. But it did happen again, and again. Late-night encounters in the kitchen became afternoon trysts during Eleanor's naps, quick stolen moments when Eleanor was occupied with her physical therapist. Each time, they promised it would be the last. Each time, they lied. Mercer constructed elaborate justifications in his mind. Eleanor couldn't be a wife to him in the physical sense anymore. Their relationship had transformed from partnership to caretaking. He still loved her. Of course he did. But didn't he deserve some happiness? Some escape from the crushing weight of watching his wife slowly disappear? June brought a relapse that kept Eleanor bedridden for 2 weeks. Mercer took emergency leave from the hospital, working alongside Sage to manage the intense symptoms. In those frightening days, their affair paused, both fully focused on Eleanor's care. You should get some rest, Sage said on the 5th night, finding Mercer slumped in a chair beside Eleanor's bed. I can monitor her. Mercer shook his head, his eyes never leaving his wife's pale face. I need to be here. Sage placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're no good to her, exhausted. I can't leave her, he insisted, his voice breaking. If something happened while I was sleeping, then I'd wake you immediately, Sage finished. I'm not asking you to abandon her, Mercer. I'm asking you to trust me. The word trust hung between them, weighted with the knowledge of their betrayal. Could he truly trust Sage with Eleanor's care while carrying on an affair behind her back? The cognitive dissonance was staggering. As Eleanor slowly recovered from the relapse, Mercer returned to work, throwing himself into complex surgeries and hospital politics with renewed vigor. The operating room became his sanctuary, a place where decisions were clear-cut, where saving lives didn't involve moral compromise. At a department meeting, the chief of surgery announced plans to expand the neurosurgery department with a new leadership position opening. "You're the obvious choice, Mercer," said Dr. Lisa Chen, a colleague he'd known since residency. "The board practically has your name engraved on the door already." "I appreciate the vote of confidence," he replied, "but with Eleanor's condition—" "All the more reason," Lisa interrupted. "The position comes with a significant pay increase. You could hire more help at home." More help? The phrase echoed in his mind as he drove home that evening. More help meant more time away from home, more responsibility at the hospital. It also meant more opportunity to maintain his double life. The affair with Sage had settled into a routine that terrified him with its normalcy. They were careful, calculating, professional in Eleanor's presence. No one suspected, not their friends, not the rotation of specialists who visited the house, not Eleanor herself, whose cognitive function remained sharp despite her physical decline. Except once, during a dinner with Griffin Walsh, Mercer caught his colleague watching Sage with unusual intensity. As she cleared plates from the dining room, Griffin leaned across the table. "She's quite something," he said quietly, eyes still following Sage's retreating form. "Where did you find her again?" "Agency recommendation," Mercer replied, suddenly uneasy. "Why?" Griffin shrugged, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Just curious. She seems exceptionally devoted to your family." There was something in his tone that set Mercer on edge, as if Griffin knew something he didn't. Before he could probe further, Eleanor asked a question about a new immunotherapy trial, and the moment passed. July brought a heat wave that kept Eleanor confined to the air-conditioned house. On one particularly stifling afternoon, Mercer came home early to find Sage on the phone in the backyard, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I need more time," he heard her say, her back to the house. "It's complicated." "No, you don't understand what's at stake here." She turned, suddenly spotting him, and her expression shifted seamlessly from distress to welcome. "I've got to go," she said into the phone before ending the call. "Family troubles?" Mercer asked as she approached. "Something like that," she replied, slipping the phone into her pocket. "My sister's going through a divorce. It's messy." The explanation was plausible, yet something in her demeanor nagged at him. A tension in her shoulders, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. He pushed the thought aside, telling himself he was being paranoid. That night, as they lay in the guest bedroom that had become their clandestine meeting place, Sage seemed distracted, her responses to his touch mechanical rather than passionate. "Is everything okay?" he asked, propping himself up on one elbow. "If you're worried about your sister—" "It's not that," she interrupted, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Mercer, we need to talk." 4 words that never preceded good news. He felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "I'm listening," he said carefully. Sage sat up, pulling the sheet around her naked body like armor. "This situation, it's not sustainable. I can't keep being her nurse and your, whatever this is, at the same time." Relief washed through him. This was a conversation about definitions, about clarifying boundaries. He could handle that. "I know it's complicated," he began. "I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Pregnant. The ultimate consequence. The undeniable evidence of their betrayal. "That's... Are you certain?" he managed finally. Sage nodded, her expression unreadable in the dim light. 8 weeks, I confirmed it yesterday. 8 weeks. He did the mental calculation. Right around Eleanor's birthday, their first time together. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on him. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his medical training taking over where emotional processing failed. "That depends on what you want," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I know you're in an impossible situation, Mercer. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it has. Now we need to decide how to move forward. Forward. As if there were a clear path through this moral quagmire." His mind raced through scenarios, each more devastating than the last. Abortion? Adoption? Secret child support while maintaining his marriage? Every option seemed unconscionable. "I need time to think," he said finally. Sage placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but insistent. "We don't have much time, Mercer. Eleanor will notice eventually, and She took a deep breath. "I want this baby. I know the timing is awful, but I've always wanted to be a mother." The word mother broke through his shock. A baby. His baby. A child. something he and Eleanor had decided against early in their marriage, a decision he'd sometimes regretted during quiet moments of reflection. "Move in with me," Sage continued, her words coming faster now. "We can get a place together, start fresh. Eleanor deserves better than a husband who's living a double life, and you deserve a chance at happiness. You're asking me to leave my wife, my sick wife. I'm asking you to be honest. With Eleanor, with yourself, with me." Sage's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "What we're doing now is cruel to everyone involved. A clean break would at least give Eleanor dignity." Dignity. The word resonated painfully. What dignity had he allowed his wife these past months, sleeping with her nurse under their shared roof? For a week, Mercer moved through his life like a sleepwalker. He performed surgeries with mechanical precision. He sat through meetings without hearing a word. He came home to find Eleanor and Sage in their usual positions. Eleanor in her wheelchair by the window, Sage nearby with medications and water, and the domesticity of the scene made him physically ill. At night, he lay awake beside Eleanor, listening to her breathing, remembering a time when that sound had been his greatest comfort, rather than a reminder of his betrayal. During stolen moments with Sage, he found himself studying her abdomen, trying to imagine the life growing inside her. His child, a biological impossibility with Eleanor now made real with another woman. The decision crystallized not in a moment of passionate clarity, but in the sterile confines of the hospital cafeteria. Griffin found him there, staring into a cup of cold coffee. "You look like hell," his colleague observed, sliding into the seat across from him. "Thanks for the diagnostic assessment," Mercer replied dryly. Griffin studied him with clinical detachment. "Either you're harboring a brain tumor you're not telling us about, or your home situation has taken a turn." Mercer considered deflecting, maintaining the facade of control he'd perfected. Instead, he heard himself say, "Sage is pregnant." Griffin's expression remained neutral, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. "Ah, and the father?" "Me." Griffin leaned back, absorbing this information. "That complicates things." The understatement was so absurd that Mercer laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You could say that. What are you going to do?" The simple question cut through the noise in Mercer's mind. What was he going to do? Continue the deception until it inevitably imploded? Leave his wife when she needed him most? There were no good options, only varying degrees of harm. "I think I have to tell Eleanor," he said finally. "Ask for a divorce." Griffin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Bold move." "Not bold. Necessary." Mercer ran a hand over his face. "This isn't sustainable. Eleanor deserves better than a husband who's living a lie." "And Sage? What does she deserve?" The question caught Mercer off guard. There was something in Griffin's tone, an edge he couldn't quite identify. "A chance to raise her child with its father," he answered carefully. Griffin nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Well, truth is generally the best policy, though in my experience it's rarely as cleansing as people hope." That evening, Mercer returned home with his decision made. He found Sage in the kitchen, preparing Eleanor's evening medications. "We need to tell her," he said without preamble. "Together. It should come from both of us." Sage's hands stilled over the pill organizer. "Are you sure? It might be easier coming just from you." "Nothing about this will be easy," Mercer replied. "But I won't be a coward about it. We did this together. We'll face the consequences together." Sage studied him for a long moment before nodding. "When?" "Sunday morning. Eleanor's always strongest in the mornings. We'll talk to her then." The decision made, Mercer felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The deception would end. The path forward would be difficult, painful, even disastrous, but at least it would be honest. As he climbed the stairs to check on Eleanor, he tried to imagine the words he would use to shatter her world. How did one ask for freedom from a marriage while the other person was imprisoned by their own failing body? What possible justification could he offer that wouldn't reveal him as the villain of their story? There were no good answers, only the certainty that the life they had built together was about to end, replaced by something he couldn't yet imagine, something built on the foundation of betrayal. Sunday morning arrived with cruel perfection. Sunshine streaming through the windows, birds singing in the oak trees that surrounded their property. Mercer had barely slept, rehearsing words that never seemed adequate for the magnitude of what he was about to do. He found Eleanor already awake, sitting up in bed with a book open on her lap. The good days were becoming rarer, but today appeared to be one of them. Her eyes were clear, her hands steady enough to turn pages without assistance. "You're up early," she noted, marking her place with a leather bookmark, his gift on their 5th anniversary. "We need to talk," he said, perching on the edge of the bed. "Something important." Eleanor closed her book completely, giving him her full attention. Despite the disease's progression, her mind remained razor-sharp, her blue eyes missing nothing. "That sounds ominous," she said, her tone light, though her expression had turned watchful. "I've asked Sage to join us," he continued, his mouth suddenly dry. "She should be part of this conversation." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, but she merely nodded. "Should I be worried, Mercer?" Before he could answer, a soft knock at the door announced Sage's arrival. She entered dressed not in her usual scrubs but in jeans and a simple blouse, her copper hair loose around her shoulders. The deliberate casualness of her appearance wasn't lost on Eleanor, whose gaze darted between them with growing comprehension. "Please sit," Eleanor said, gesturing to the armchair near the bed. The politeness was pure Eleanor, the consummate hostess, even in what was clearly becoming an ambush. Sage perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The confidence she displayed in all her nursing duties seemed to have abandoned her completely. "Eleanor," Mercer began, forcing himself to maintain eye contact with his wife. "I don't know how to say this, so I'll just be direct. Sage and we've developed feelings for each other. It wasn't planned, and it's not an excuse, but it happened." Eleanor's face remained remarkably composed, though something flickered behind her eyes, a brief flash of pain quickly controlled. "I see," she said carefully. "And you're telling me this because—" Mercer glanced at Sage, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Sage is pregnant," he continued, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. "We're going to have a baby together." Eleanor was silent for so long that Mercer wondered if she'd heard him. She looked out the window, toward the garden where they'd celebrated her birthday just months ago. When she finally turned back, her expression was oddly sympathetic. "How far along?" she asked, addressing Sage directly. "Almost 9 weeks now," Sage replied, her voice steady but quiet. Eleanor nodded slowly as if processing complex information. "And you're certain it's Mercer's?" The question hung in the air, its unexpectedness stunning them both. Sage's cheeks flushed. "Of course," she said, a note of defensiveness creeping into her tone. Eleanor turned her attention back to Mercer. "So you've come to ask for a divorce?" It wasn't a question but a statement of fact. Mercer nodded, unable to find his voice in the face of her calm analysis. "I understand," Eleanor said simply. Her composure was more devastating than any rage or breakdown would have been. Mercer had prepared for tears, for accusations, for the emotional upheaval that should accompany the end of a 12-year marriage. This quiet acceptance was unsettling. "You're taking this very calmly," he observed. Eleanor adjusted herself against the pillows, wincing slightly as she shifted her position. "What would you prefer, Mercer? That I throw things, scream, collapse into a convenient MS episode to make you feel worse than you already do?" Her words, though soft, carried a bite he rarely heard from her. The glimpse of anger reassured him somehow, proof that she still cared enough to be hurt. "No, of course not," he said quickly. I know this is a lot to process." "It is," she agreed, "though perhaps not in the way you imagine." She paused, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "How long has this been going on?" 3 months, Sage answered when Mercer hesitated. Eleanor's eyes never left her husband's face. "Since my birthday party." It wasn't a question, but Mercer nodded in confirmation. "I suspected something," Eleanor admitted. "The way you looked at each other, the conversations that stopped when I entered a room. I just never thought you'd be foolish enough to get her pregnant." The word foolish stung more than any profanity might have. It reduced their passion, their complicated emotions, to a simple act of stupidity. "It wasn't planned," Sage interjected, leaning forward. "But now that it's happened, we want to do the right thing. Be honest with you instead of continuing to live a lie." Eleanor turned to Sage, her expression softening into something almost like pity. "Since when do you know that Mercer is sterile?" The question landed like a physical blow. Mercer felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at his wife in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Your medical history," Eleanor replied calmly. "The severe case of mumps when you were 15. The doctors told your parents it had likely caused sterility. It's why we agreed early in our marriage not to try for children. You said you'd come to terms with it years ago. Mercer shook his head, struggling to process her words. That's not... I never had mumps. Not mumps, Eleanor corrected herself with a dismissive wave. Varicella, the severe case that nearly killed you as a teenager. The doctors said there was a 99% chance of sterility. You told me this yourself during our second year of marriage. The room seemed to tilt around him. Mercer searched his memory desperately. He'd had chickenpox as a child, a mild case. Nothing life-threatening. Certainly nothing that affected his fertility. He turned to Sage, whose face had gone deathly pale. Her earlier confidence evaporated completely. Tell her she's mistaken, he said, his voice barely recognizable to his own ears. Tell her the baby is mine. Sage's eyes darted between husband and wife, a cornered animal searching for escape. Mercer, I didn't know, she stammered. Know what? He demanded, rising from the bed. What didn't you know, Sage? That you were sterile, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I swear I didn't know. The admission hit him like a physical blow. He staggered backward, gripping the bedpost for support. Then whose baby is it? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Sage looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. Griffin, she said, the name barely audible. Griffin Walsh. Eleanor let out a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Well, that explains a few things, she said, more to herself than to them. Mercer felt as though he were watching the scene from outside his body, his wife propped up in their marital bed, calm and collected, despite her disease. His lover curled into herself in the armchair, pregnant with another man's child, himself standing between them, the architect of his own destruction. Griffin knew, he said slowly as the pieces fell into place. The way he looked at you that night at dinner, the questions about where we found you, he knew. Sage nodded miserably. He didn't want me to use you like this. He tried to talk me out of it. Use me? Mercer repeated, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. Use me for what? Griffin wouldn't leave his wife, Sage explained, her voice small. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he needed time, but I knew he was never going to leave her. And then you and I, it happened, and I thought maybe, you thought I'd be your backup plan, Mercer finished, the brutal truth crystallizing in his mind. A respected doctor to give your child a name, to support you both. It wasn't like that, Sage protested, though her eyes told a different story. I do care about you, Mercer. That wasn't a lie. Eleanor watched the exchange with an expression that bordered on clinical interest, like a scientist observing a particularly fascinating experiment. I always knew something was happening, she said when Sage fell silent. The whispers, the late-night conversations, the way you both looked at each other when you thought I couldn't see. I just didn't expect you'd be stupid enough to try to deceive me with an impossible pregnancy. The calm superiority in her tone cut deeper than any rage could have. Mercer felt himself shrinking under her gaze, reduced from respected neurosurgeon to foolish, deceived husband in the span of minutes. How long have you known about my supposed sterility? He asked her, grasping for something, anything that might make sense of the collapsing reality around him. Since the beginning, Eleanor replied simply. It's why I agreed not to have children. I thought you knew, Mercer. I thought we'd made that decision together. The revelation was staggering. All these years they'd built their life on mutual understanding that wasn't mutual at all. A fundamental miscommunication that had shaped their entire marriage. I never knew, he said, his voice hollow. I would have told you if I knew. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. Perhaps that's true, though it seems there's a great deal we haven't told each other over the years. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by Sage's quiet sniffling. The elaborate construction of lies and half-truths they'd all been living within had collapsed completely, leaving nothing but rubble. What happens now? Sage finally asked, looking between them. Now, Eleanor said with surprising authority. You leave my house, pack your things and be gone within the hour. Sage nodded, rising unsteadily to her feet. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I never meant for any of this to happen. And yet it did, Eleanor replied coolly. Intentions count for very little in the face of actions, don't they? When the door closed behind Sage, Mercer remained rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to think clearly through the fog of betrayal and humiliation. You should call the agency, Eleanor said practically. We'll need a new nurse by tomorrow. Her calm efficiency was maddening. "How can you be so composed?" he demanded. "I just told you I was leaving you for another woman. That should mean something. And I just told you that woman is carrying another man's child while trying to trick you into believing it's yours," Eleanor countered. "Does that mean something to you, Mercer?" The question landed like a slap. Of course it meant something. It meant everything had been a lie. Sage's passion, her declarations of love, her vision of their future together. "I need to speak with Griffin," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "By all means," Eleanor agreed, reopening her book as if they were discussing something as mundane as dinner plans. "Though I doubt he'll have any more honesty to offer than Ms. Morgan did." The conversation with Griffin was brief and devastating. Yes, he had been involved with Sage for nearly a year. Yes, he knew she had begun a relationship with Mercer. No, he had not encouraged her plan to pass the child off as Mercer's, but he hadn't stopped her either. "I'm sorry, Mercer," Griffin said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "I should have warned you. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere." "Not your place," Mercer repeated incredulously. "You're my colleague, my friend. You sat at my dinner table while your pregnant girlfriend served us food, knowing exactly what she was doing to my marriage. It was wrong," Griffin admitted. "There's no excuse." "Does your wife know?" Mercer asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Griffin replied after a brief pause. "And Mercer, I'd appreciate your discretion on that front." The audacity was almost impressive. "You want me to keep your secret after you've helped destroy my marriage?" "Karina is undergoing chemotherapy," Griffin said quietly. "This would devastate her." The mention of Griffin's wife, a pediatric surgeon currently fighting breast cancer, doused Mercer's anger with cold reality. More innocents caught in the crossfire of their selfishness. "I won't tell her," he said finally, "but not for your sake." By Monday morning, the story had somehow spread through Memorial Hospital like wildfire. Whispers followed Mercer through the corridors. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. A nurse who had always been friendly avoided his eyes in the elevator. Dr. Lisa Chen found him in his office, closing the door behind her with uncharacteristic gentleness. "The board is meeting this afternoon," she said without preamble. "About the department expansion." "I assume I'm no longer the obvious choice," Mercer replied, not looking up from his computer. "It's politics, Mercer. You know how it is. The potential scandal—" "I understand." He did. Hospitals lived and died by their reputations. A neurosurgeon who couldn't keep his personal life in order was a liability. "For what it's worth, I tried to advocate for you," Lisa offered. "Your surgical record speaks for itself." "Thank you," he said, meaning it despite the hollow feeling in his chest. "Who will they choose instead?" Lisa hesitated. "Griffin Walsh is being considered." The irony was almost too perfect. Mercer laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made Lisa flinch. "Of course he is," he said. "Tell the board they're making the right choice. Dr. Walsh is an exemplary physician." He was being petty, he knew. Griffin's affair with Sage had been just as inappropriate as his own. But Griffin had managed what Mercer hadn't: discretion. His indiscretions remained whispers rather than confirmed gossip. His reputation remained intact. By week's end, Mercer's carefully constructed life had imploded completely. The leadership position went to Griffin, announced in a hospital-wide email that Mercer deleted without reading. Eleanor had hired a new nurse, a matronly woman in her 60s with pictures of grandchildren in her wallet. Sage had disappeared entirely, her apartment emptied according to the building manager Mercer foolishly contacted. Friday evening found him sitting alone in the guest house of his own property, a small structure originally intended as Eleanor's writing studio before her illness made the short walk from the main house too difficult. Now it was his temporary home, neither of them ready to make permanent decisions about their marriage. The space was suffocating in its emptiness. No medical equipment, no beeping monitors, no schedule of medications on the refrigerator, just silence and the weight of his own catastrophic choices. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a message from Sage. "I'm leaving for Boston tomorrow. I never meant to hurt you. What we had was real for me, even if you don't believe that now. I'm sorry." He stared at the screen until it went dark, then tossed the phone aside without replying. What could he possibly say? That he forgave her? That he understood using him as a backup plan while carrying another man's child? That he wished her well in her new life? The truth was simpler and more devastating. Despite everything, part of him missed her. Not just the physical intimacy they'd shared, but the feeling of possibility she had represented, an escape from the guilt and obligation that had become the foundation of his marriage. As darkness fell over the guest house, Mercer Bishop, respected neurosurgeon, unfaithful husband, deceived lover, sat alone with the understanding that every certainty in his life had been an illusion. His professional reputation, his marriage, his brief affair, all built on miscommunications, half-truths, and outright deceptions. The only reality he could trust was this: he had tried to escape one painful situation by creating another, and in doing so, had lost everything that once defined him. The Memorial Hospital Ethics Committee meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after what Mercer had come to think of as the revelation. The formal conference room, with its oversized mahogany table and leather chairs, felt more like a courtroom than a place for professional discussion. Dr. Malcolm Reed, the silver-haired chief of medicine, sat at the head of the table, flanked by the hospital's legal counsel and the HR director. Mercer took the lone seat across from them, acutely aware of the power imbalance the seating arrangement created. "Dr. Bishop," Malcolm began, his tone carefully neutral, "thank you for meeting with us this morning. I want to emphasize that this is not a disciplinary hearing, merely a discussion about recent events and their potential impact on the hospital." Mercer nodded, recognizing the careful language for what it was, a preemptive legal defense. "Let me be direct," Malcolm continued. "Your personal situation has become a topic of discussion among the staff, which is unfortunate but unavoidable in our environment. Our concern is whether these circumstances might affect patient care or the hospital's reputation. My personal difficulties have not and will not impact my work," Mercer stated firmly. "My surgical outcomes remain excellent. I've never mixed my home life with my professional responsibilities." The lawyer, a woman with a perpetual frown, glanced down at her notes. "It's our understanding that your relationship with Nurse Morgan began while she was employed in your household caring for your wife. That does raise questions about professional boundaries." Mercer felt heat rising in his face. "Sage Morgan was not employed by Memorial. She worked privately for my family through an outside agency. Nevertheless," the lawyer pressed, The perception, Mercer interrupted, "is that I made a terrible personal mistake, not a professional one." Malcolm sighed, leaning forward. "Mercer, no one is questioning your surgical abilities, but leadership positions require more than technical skill. They require judgment, discretion. I'm no longer being considered for the department expansion role. I understand that and accept it." Mercer's voice remained steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "Is my current position also in jeopardy?" The three exchanged glances before Malcolm shook his head. "No. However, the committee suggests a temporary reduction in your public-facing responsibilities. No media interviews, reduced teaching duties, and a 6-month probationary period during which your case selections will require additional oversight." The conditions felt punitive despite Malcolm's insistence that this wasn't disciplinary action. Still, Mercer recognized a compromise when he heard one. They weren't firing him, they were containing him. "And Dr. Walsh?" he asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from his voice. "Will he face similar scrutiny for his involvement with the same nurse?" Malcolm's expression tightened. "Dr. Walsh's situation is not the subject of this meeting." Of course not. Griffin's indiscretion remained mostly rumor, while Mercer's had exploded into confirmed gossip. The double standard was infuriating, but not surprising. "I accept the committee's recommendations," Mercer said finally, recognizing there was little choice if he wanted to preserve what remained of his career. As he left the meeting, he passed the hospital's east wing, where Griffin's new corner office, the one that should have been his, overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Through the glass walls, he could see his colleague in animated conversation with the board chairman, both men laughing comfortably. The scene crystallized something for Mercer. In the wreckage of his personal life, he'd been clinging to his professional identity as the one stable element remaining. Now even that was tarnished. The respect he'd spent decades building had been compromised in weeks. The following day, passing the nurse's station on rounds, Mercer overheard a snippet of conversation that stopped him cold. "Left for Seattle, apparently. My cousin works at University Medical Center there. Says she started last week in the oncology department. Guess she has a type," another voice replied, followed by muffled laughter. Sage had gone to Seattle, not Boston, as her text claimed. The realization that even her goodbye had contained a lie shouldn't have hurt, but it did. A fresh cut over barely formed scars. He continued his rounds mechanically, examining patients and dictating notes with practiced efficiency, while his mind circled the same painful questions. Had anything between them been real? Had she ever actually cared for him? Or had he simply been a convenient solution to her problem? When he returned home that evening, to the guest house that still didn't feel like home, he found Eleanor on the back porch of the main house, bundled in a cashmere throw despite the mild weather. Her new nurse, Martha, hovered nearby, arranging medications on a small table. "You can go, Martha," Eleanor said, noticing Mercer's approach. "Dr. Bishop can help me inside if needed." The older woman nodded, giving Mercer a look that managed to be both sympathetic and judgmental, before disappearing into the house. "She doesn't approve of you," Eleanor observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Says men who stray once always do it again." Mercer settled into the chair beside her, too exhausted to be defensive. "She's probably right." "Probably," Eleanor agreed, surprising him with her candor, though Martha's ex-husband ran off with their daughter's college roommate, so she might be biased. The absurdity of discussing his infidelity so casually with his wife struck Mercer suddenly. Just weeks ago, they'd been living separate lives under the same roof, maintaining the fiction of a functioning marriage. Now they were talking about his affair with the detachment of strangers, discussing a movie plot. "Why aren't you angrier?" he asked impulsively. "You have every right to hate me." Eleanor considered the question, her gaze fixed on the darkening garden. "I was angry at first. Furious, actually. Martha can tell you about the vase I threw against the wall after you left that first day." The image of his composed, intellectual wife throwing crockery was so incongruous that Mercer almost smiled. "But anger is exhausting," she continued, "and with MS I have limited energy to begin with. I decided to use it more productively, like hiring a nurse who thinks I'm irredeemable." "Martha's excellent at her job," Eleanor countered, "and she makes me laugh. Do you know how rare that is these days, to find someone who doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass?" The question hit Mercer like a physical blow. When was the last time he'd made Eleanor laugh? When had their relationship transformed from partnership to patient care? "I didn't do that deliberately," he said quietly. "Treat you like glass." "I know." Her voice softened. "You became my doctor instead of my husband." It was gradual, so subtle that neither of us noticed until it was too late. The statement held no accusation, just a sad acknowledgement of their shared reality. Somehow that made it worse. "I should have talked to you," Mercer admitted, "about how things were changing between us, about how lost I felt." "Yes, you should have," Eleanor agreed, "and I should have talked to you too. We both retreated when we should have reached toward each other." They sat in silence for a while, watching fireflies begin to illuminate the garden. The conversation felt like the first honest one they'd had in years, perhaps ever. "I saw the ethics committee today," Mercer said finally. "They've put me on a 6-month probation, reduced responsibilities, additional oversight." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "And Griffin?" "Untouched, as far as I know." He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "That must be difficult," she said, and to his surprise, her sympathy seemed genuine. "You've always defined yourself by your work." "Is that a criticism?" "An observation," she corrected. "We both did it, defined ourselves by external achievements rather than our relationship. You with your surgeries, me with my academic career. Then when my MS progressed and I couldn't teach anymore." She left the thought unfinished, but Mercer understood. Eleanor had lost her professional identity to her illness, while he had clung to his more fiercely than ever. "I think we should formally separate," she said after another long silence. "Not divorce, not yet, but create some official distance. You should move to the apartment in the city." The suggestion wasn't unexpected, but it still stung. Their Manhattan apartment, purchased as an investment years ago, had been rented out to medical residents for the past 3 years. "The lease isn't up for another 4 months, he said. "I called the tenants last week. They're moving out at the end of the month, pre-med couple matching residencies in Chicago." Eleanor's practical efficiency was both impressive and disconcerting. "I thought you might appreciate not living in what amounts to a glorified tool shed." Mercer glanced back at the guest house with its cramped quarters and sparse furnishings. "Thank you. That's considerate." "Don't mistake practicality for forgiveness," Eleanor warned, though without malice. "I'm not ready for that yet. I may never be. but I don't see the point in unnecessary discomfort while we figure out what comes next." "And what does come next?" Mercer asked, realizing he had been avoiding this crucial question. Eleanor sighed, pulling her throw tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know. Neither of us can make permanent decisions while we're still processing everything. Time and distance seem sensible." Her rationality in the face of his betrayal was remarkable, and profoundly Eleanor. Even before her illness, she had approached life's challenges with analytical clarity, breaking complex problems into manageable pieces. "I don't deserve your reasonableness," he said. "This isn't about what you deserve," she replied simply. "It's about what I need to heal." The word heal lingered between them. For so long, healing had been a clinical concept in their household. Medications, treatments, therapies. Now it represented something more elusive. Emotional recovery, rebuilding trust, finding a path forward through betrayal. By month's end, Mercer had relocated to the Manhattan apartment, a sleek one-bedroom with views of Central Park that felt more like a hotel suite than a home. The ease of his commute to the hospital was the only improvement in his daily life. Evenings stretched empty before him, no longer filled with Eleanor's care or Sage's companionship. In this emptiness, Mercer began the uncomfortable work of self-examination. What had he been seeking in his affair with Sage? The obvious answer, physical intimacy, felt insufficient. Their relationship had begun with conversation, with her interest in his thoughts and feelings, with the simple act of being seen as something other than a doctor or caretaker. Had he ever truly seen Eleanor the same way, or had he retreated into his professional identity to avoid the messy, complicated emotions of watching his brilliant wife's body betray her? The questions haunted him through sleepless nights and lonely mornings. His reduced hospital duties left him with unexpected free time. On impulse, he began volunteering at a free clinic in Harlem, treating patients who couldn't afford neurology consultations. The work was basic compared to his usual complex surgeries, but there was something grounding about it. Medicine stripped to its essence, helping people without the prestige or politics of memorial. 6 weeks into their separation, Eleanor called on a Wednesday evening. "Are you busy Friday?" she asked without preamble. "No," he replied, surprised by the contact. Their communication had been limited to practical matters since his move. "What's happening Friday?" "I'd like you to come to the house. There's something we need to discuss." Mercer felt a knot form in his stomach. "Is everything all right? Has your condition—" "I'm fine," she interrupted. "Better than expected, actually. But this isn't something we should talk about over the phone." The cryptic response left him uneasy, but he agreed to the meeting. For the next 2 days, he cycled through possibilities. Had she decided on divorce after all? Found another damning secret about Sage? Received concerning new medical results? When Friday arrived, Mercer drove to Westchester with mounting anxiety. Martha opened the door with her usual mixture of cordiality and disapproval, directing him to Eleanor's study rather than the living room where they typically met. He found Eleanor surrounded by papers and medical journals, her laptop open to what appeared to be a medical database. She looked more animated than he'd seen her in months. "You're here," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Good. We have a lot to talk about." Mercer sat, taking in the organized chaos around her. "What's all this?" "Research," she replied, adjusting her reading glasses. "I've been investigating your medical history, specifically the sterility you didn't know about." The topic was so unexpected that Mercer momentarily lost his composure. "Why would you do that?" "Because something didn't add up," Eleanor explained, shuffling through papers with surprising dexterity. "You genuinely had no idea you were sterile. That much was clear from your reaction. Yet I distinctly remember a conversation early in our marriage about your childhood illness and its consequences." Mercer shook his head. "I never had serious childhood illnesses. Chickenpox, yes, but a mild case. Nothing that would cause sterility." "Exactly," Eleanor said, a note of triumph in her voice. "So I started digging. Called your parents, requested your childhood medical records, consulted with specialists." The thoroughness of her investigation was both impressive and slightly alarming. "And what did you find?" Eleanor removed her glasses, meeting his eyes directly. "You're not sterile, Mercer. You never were." The statement hit him with physical force. "That's not possible. You said the doctors told my parents." "I said that based on what I believed to be true," Eleanor interrupted. "But your medical records show no evidence of complications from chickenpox. or any other childhood illness that would affect fertility. Your parents confirmed you were never seriously ill as a child. Mercer struggled to process this information. Then why did you think? Because someone told me, Eleanor said, her expression grave. Someone whose word I trusted completely. Understanding dawned slowly, painfully. Who? Dr. Alan Reed. The name took a moment to register. Malcolm's father. My mentor. Eleanor nodded. During our second year of marriage, when I was considering stopping birth control, he pulled me aside at a hospital fundraiser, said he had ethical concerns about letting me proceed without knowing the truth about your condition. The pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. Alan Reed had been Mercer's mentor during residency, the surgeon who had shaped his career. He had also strongly opposed Mercer's marriage to Eleanor, believing it would distract from his promising surgical future. He lied to you, Mercer said slowly, to prevent us from having children. So it seems, Eleanor agreed. At the time, I had no reason to doubt him. He was your mentor, a respected physician. Why would he fabricate something so significant? The betrayal cut deep, deeper in some ways than Sage's deception. Alan Reed had been like a father to Mercer, guiding his career for over a decade before his retirement 5 years ago. He never wanted me to marry you, Mercer remembered. Said a surgeon of my caliber needed to be fully committed to medicine, not distracted by family obligations. A view his son apparently shares, Eleanor observed dryly. Malcolm has been divorced 3 times, if I recall correctly. The implications were staggering. Their entire married life, the decision not to have children, the focus on their careers, perhaps even the distance that had grown between them, had been influenced by a lie told by a man who believed he knew what was best for Mercer's future. I found something else, Eleanor continued, turning her laptop toward him. There's a fertility specialist at Cleveland Clinic who's had remarkable success treating couples in situations similar to ours, where neurological conditions complicate conception and pregnancy. Mercer stared at the screen, struggling to follow this unexpected turn in the conversation. You're talking about having a baby? Now? I'm talking about possibilities, Eleanor corrected, about the fact that choices were taken from us based on false information. Whether we act on those possibilities is a separate discussion. The careful precision of her language wasn't lost on Mercer. She wasn't suggesting they reconcile, wasn't offering forgiveness or a fresh start. She was simply presenting facts, restoring agency that had been stolen from them both. Why are you telling me this? He asked finally. After everything that's happened between us. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a medical journal. Because despite your betrayal, despite the pain of these past months, I believe you deserve to know the truth about your own body. And because, she hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty from a woman who typically chose her words with meticulous care. Because what? Mercer prompted gently. Because I've spent 8 months watching my body betray me piece by piece, she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. I know what it feels like to have your physical reality dictated by forces beyond your control. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even a husband who broke my heart. The raw honesty of her statement struck Mercer speechless. In all their years together, through academic achievements and medical crises, he had never heard Eleanor express vulnerability so directly. The specialist in Cleveland has agreed to consult with us, she continued, filling his silence. Not as a couple necessarily, but as 2 people trying to understand their options. I've scheduled a video call for next week. Mercer nodded, still processing the magnitude of what Eleanor had shared. Not just the revelation about his fertility, but her willingness to pursue this information for his benefit, despite their fractured relationship. Thank you, he said finally, the words wholly inadequate for the moment, for doing this research, for telling me. Eleanor closed her laptop, signaling the end of their conversation. It's getting late. Martha will be concerned if you stay too long. The dismissal was gentle but firm. Mercer stood, recognizing the emotional toll this meeting must have taken on her. As he reached the door, Eleanor called after him. Mercer? He turned back. The specialist believes there may be treatments for both of us, she said, her expression impossible to read. For your fertility and for my condition. Experimental but promising. The statement hung in the air between them, not quite an invitation, not quite a promise, but something unfamiliar in their recent interactions. Hope. 3 weeks after their discussion about the fertility specialist, Mercer was completing post-op notes when his phone vibrated with a text from Eleanor. "Come to the house tonight. 7 p.m. Important news." The message was typical. Eleanor, direct, concise, revealing nothing of her emotional state. Mercer stared at the screen, anxiety and anticipation warring in his chest. They'd spoken twice since her revelation about his fertility status. Both conversations focused exclusively on medical details. He left the hospital early, something he rarely did before the scandal. His reduced surgical schedule made the departure less conspicuous, though he felt the weight of curious glances as he hurried through the lobby. Traffic was mercifully light, allowing him to reach Westchester by 6:45. The house looked different somehow, more vibrant, with freshly planted flowers lining the walkway and new cushions on the porch furniture. Small changes that suggested life continuing despite the upheaval of recent months. Martha opened the door before he could knock, her usual stern expression softened by something resembling approval. "She's in the sunroom," the nurse said, taking his coat. "Been working herself up to this conversation all day. Try not to upset her." The protective warning was unnecessary. The last thing Mercer wanted was to cause Eleanor further pain, but he nodded in acknowledgement. He found his wife seated in her wheelchair by the large windows that overlooked their garden. The evening sun cast her in golden light, highlighting the subtle improvements in her appearance. Her hair styled rather than simply brushed back, a hint of color in her cheeks, a new blouse he hadn't seen before. "You're early," she observed, setting aside the tablet she'd been reading from. "Light traffic," he replied, taking the chair across from her. "Your message sounded urgent." Eleanor nodded, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her wheelchair, a gesture of nervous energy he hadn't seen since her diagnosis. "I had my third telehealth consultation with Dr. Abernathy today," she began, referencing the Cleveland specialist. "He's reviewed all my records, consulted with my neurologist, and analyzed the most recent MRIs. Mercer leaned forward, medical instincts taking over. "And? He believes I'm a strong candidate for the experimental treatment protocol," Eleanor said, a hint of cautious optimism in her voice. "More than that, he wants me to participate in a clinical trial that's showing promising results for aggressive MS cases like mine." That's... Mercer searched for the right reaction, aware of the delicate balance between encouragement and false hope. "That's potentially significant news." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "The trial combines immunomodulatory therapy with targeted neural stem cell treatments. Early results show a 62% reduction in symptom progression, with some patients experiencing partial reversal of existing damage. The statistics were impressive, far better than any current approved treatments. Still, Mercer's medical training made him cautious. Side effects? Risk factors? Moderate to severe in approximately 17% of participants, Eleanor recited, clearly having memorized the data. Primarily immune-related complications that resolved with intervention. No treatment-related mortalities in the Phase 1 cohort. The clinical exchange felt familiar, almost comfortable, a return to the intellectual partnership that had been the foundation of their relationship. For a moment, Mercer could almost forget the betrayals and lies that had shattered that foundation. "When would this start?" he asked. "That's why I asked you to come tonight," Eleanor said, her professional demeanor giving way to something more vulnerable. "I've been accepted into the trial, but it requires relocation to Cleveland for a minimum of 3 months. Initial treatments, monitoring, adjustments to the protocol. I'd need to leave within 2 weeks." The timeline was aggressive, but not unusual for cutting-edge trials, where participant slots were limited and precious. "Of course," Mercer said immediately. "We'll make whatever arrangements you need. I can coordinate with Martha about—" "Martha isn't coming with me," Eleanor interrupted. "The trial provides specialized nursing care for all participants." "Then I'll come on weekends," Mercer offered. "Take the Friday evening flight, return Sunday night." "I can manage my schedule to—" "That's not what I'm asking, Mercer." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Dr. Abernathy also reviewed your information. The fertility specialist on his team believes you're an excellent candidate for their treatment protocol as well." Mercer blinked, struggling to follow her meaning. "You're suggesting I come to Cleveland with you, for both treatments simultaneously?" Eleanor nodded, meeting his gaze directly. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." The proposal was so unexpected that Mercer found himself momentarily speechless. After months of separation, after the pain and betrayal that had driven them apart, Eleanor was suggesting they undertake this medical journey together. Why? He asked finally, the single word encompassing all his confusion. Eleanor took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. Because I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened to us. Not just your affair with Sage, but everything that led to it. The distance that grew between us after my diagnosis, the roles we fell into, patient and caretaker rather than partners. She adjusted herself in her wheelchair, a small wince crossing her face as she found a more comfortable position. I was so focused on what your betrayal meant about you that I never considered what it might reveal about us, about the marriage we had, or rather, the marriage we didn't have anymore. Mercer felt a tightness in his throat. I'm not sure I understand. When you told me about your affair, about Sage's pregnancy, I was devastated, Eleanor continued, but not surprised. Some part of me had been expecting it, not because I think you're fundamentally unfaithful, but because we'd stopped being present for each other long before Sage arrived. The assessment was brutally honest, yet delivered without accusation. It spoke to Eleanor's remarkable capacity for self-reflection, her ability to analyze even her own pain with clarity. That doesn't excuse what I did, Mercer said quietly. No, it doesn't, she agreed, but it helps explain it. We both retreated when we should have reached toward each other. I withdrew into my illness, you into your work. We stopped talking about anything meaningful, stopped seeing each other as people rather than roles. Her analysis cut to the heart of their dysfunction with surgical precision. Mercer had often marveled at Eleanor's emotional intelligence during their courtship and early marriage, her ability to articulate complex feelings that he struggled to name. That skill had apparently survived even the devastation of the past months. The treatments in Cleveland represent possibility, Eleanor continued when he remained silent, for both of us. Not just medical possibility, but the chance to decide what we want moving forward, with full information without the lies that shaped our past choices. Are you suggesting we try to save our marriage? Mercer asked, needing clarity. Eleanor shook her head slightly. I'm suggesting we give ourselves the opportunity to make choices based on truth rather than deception. Whether those choices lead us back to each other or toward separate futures remains to be seen. The proposition was both less and more than reconciliation. It offered no guarantees, no false promises of forgiveness or restoration. Instead, it presented something Eleanor had always valued above all else: intellectual honesty, the courage to face reality without comforting illusions. What about my position at Memorial? He asked, the practical concerns surfacing through his emotional turmoil. You're already on probation with reduced duties, Eleanor pointed out. A 3-month medical leave would likely be viewed sympathetically, especially given my participation in the trial. She had considered everything as usual: the logistical barriers, the professional implications, the potential obstacles and solutions. It was so quintessentially Eleanor that Mercer felt a sudden acute ache for the connection they'd once shared. I need to think about this, he said finally. Of course, she replied without hesitation, but we'd need to decide within the week to make the necessary arrangements. Mercer nodded, rising from his chair. As he moved to leave, a question that had been nagging at him for weeks finally surfaced. Have you heard anything about Sage? He asked, unable to keep a hint of shame from his voice. Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Not quite anger, not quite satisfaction. I received a letter from her last week. Apparently she's left Seattle. Did she say where she went? Boston, according to the postmark. She's had the baby, a boy. The news landed like a physical blow, though Mercer wasn't sure why. He had no claim to Sage's child, no connection to her life anymore. There's something else, Eleanor added, her expression unreadable. She included DNA test results with the letter. Mercer froze, halfway to the door. DNA results? Yes. It seems she was uncertain about the paternity herself. Eleanor's tone remained carefully neutral. The child isn't Griffin's. Then who's? Dr. Malcolm Reed. The name struck Mercer like lightning. Malcolm Reed, Chief of Medicine, head of the ethics committee that had placed Mercer on probation, son of the mentor who had lied about Mercer's fertility. Malcolm? He repeated incredulously. That's not possible. He's married. He has 3 children. 4 now, apparently, Eleanor replied dryly, though I doubt his wife knows about this one. The revelation was staggering. Malcolm had sat across from Mercer in that ethics hearing, passing judgment on his professional conduct while concealing his own involvement with Sage. Does Griffin know? Mercer asked, still trying to process the information. According to Sage's letter, no. She led both of you to believe you were the father at different points. Eleanor adjusted her position again, wincing slightly. It seems our Ms. Morgan was playing a rather complex game. The detached way Eleanor discussed the situation, as if they were analyzing characters in one of her literature classes, struck Mercer suddenly. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "You could have kept this information to yourself." Eleanor considered the question, her gaze drifting to the darkening garden outside. "Because secrets and lies have already done enough damage. Because I believe in facing reality, however unpleasant. And because—" She hesitated, an unusual moment of uncertainty from a woman who typically spoke with such precision. "Because what?" Mercer prompted. "Because I thought it might help you make your decision about Cleveland," she admitted finally. "Knowing that Sage's deception went even deeper than you realized, that what you thought you found with her was built on manipulation from the start. The assessment was harsh, but accurate. Whatever genuine connection he'd felt with Sage had been undermined by layer upon layer of deception, the pregnancy she'd used to pressure him, the paternity she'd lied about, even her final message claiming she was moving to Boston when she'd actually gone to Seattle. "I'll go to Cleveland," Mercer said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in his mind. "For the treatments. For clarity." Eleanor nodded, accepting his decision without visible emotion. "I'll have Martha send you the details tomorrow. We leave on the 17th. 2 weeks later, they arrived at the Cleveland Clinic's Specialized Treatment Center, a modern facility with the sterile efficiency of a research hospital softened by design elements meant to create a healing environment. Eleanor was assigned a private room with adaptive features for her condition. Mercer received accommodations in the affiliated patient housing across the campus. Their first week passed in a flurry of baseline assessments, consultation appointments and orientation sessions. They saw each other primarily during shared meals in the center's atrium. Their conversations focused largely on medical procedures and treatment schedules. The distance between them, emotional rather than physical, remained pronounced until their 5th day, when Mercer arrived at the cafeteria to find Eleanor staring at her breakfast untouched, tears streaming silently down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Are you in pain? Should I call someone?" Eleanor shook her head, wiping at her tears with frustrated impatience. "It's nothing. The morning medication sometimes makes me emotional." But something in her expression told Mercer this was more than a pharmaceutical side effect. He waited, giving her space to collect herself. "Today would have been my father's birthday," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "He loved breakfast. Ridiculous, elaborate spreads on Sunday mornings. Pancakes shaped like animals for me and my sister." The memory was so unexpectedly personal, so removed from the medical discussions that had dominated their recent interactions, that Mercer wasn't sure how to respond. "I never knew that," he said softly. "There's a lot we never knew about each other," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze. "Even after 12 years of marriage. Isn't that strange? All that time together and we kept so much hidden." The observation wasn't accusatory but contemplative, an invitation to reflect rather than defend. "I think we were both afraid," Mercer ventured, "of being vulnerable, of needing each other too much." Eleanor considered this, her tears subsiding. "Perhaps. My father always said the Bishop women were too proud for our own good. I never told you that either." "Tell me now," Mercer suggested. "Tell me about your father's breakfasts, about the Bishop women's pride." So she did. Over cooling coffee and untouched eggs, Eleanor shared stories of her childhood that had somehow never emerged during their marriage. Her father's terrible singing voice, her mother's collection of vintage costume jewelry, the summer her sister broke her arm falling from the neighbor's apple tree. Mercer listened, recognizing the gift she was offering. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but something perhaps more valuable. Honesty. The willingness to be seen as she truly was, beyond the roles of wife, patient, or brilliant academic. In the days that followed, something shifted between them. Their conversations expanded beyond medical updates to include memories, reflections, even tentative hopes for the future. They were rediscovering each other, or perhaps discovering each other for the first time, without the protective barriers they'd maintained for so long. A month into their treatments, they sat together in the clinic's garden, Eleanor in her wheelchair, Mercer on a bench beside her. The October air carried a hint of coming winter, but the afternoon sun provided enough warmth for comfort. Dr. Abernathy says the preliminary results are encouraging, Eleanor said, examining a folder of test results. The inflammatory markers are down significantly, and there's early evidence of myelin regeneration in the treated areas. That's excellent news, Mercer replied, genuinely pleased. Eleanor's walking had improved marginally, not enough for independence, but enough to give her increased mobility during physical therapy sessions. And your treatment? She asked. Any updates? Mercer nodded, still somewhat uncomfortable discussing his fertility treatment, despite the progress they'd made in other areas of communication. The medication protocol is working as expected. They've scheduled the final evaluation for next week. Eleanor's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her eyes. And if the results are positive? If they determine the treatment has been successful? The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. If Mercer's fertility had been restored, what would that mean for them? For their future together or apart? I'm not sure, he admitted. I never thought I would have the opportunity to be a father. It's overwhelming to consider it now. Do you want children? Eleanor asked directly. Not theoretically, not because you were told you couldn't have them, but because you genuinely want to be a parent. It was a question they should have discussed years ago, before marriage, before careers and illness had complicated everything. The kind of fundamental compatibility question that couples typically resolved before committing their lives to each other. Yes, Mercer said finally, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. I think I do, but what matters more is whether you do. Eleanor's gaze drifted to a young family walking along the clinic's pathway, a mother pushing a stroller, a father carrying a toddler on his shoulders. Her expression remained unreadable. I used to think I didn't, she said carefully. That academic achievement and professional recognition would be enough. But when I was diagnosed, something shifted. I started thinking about legacy differently, about what remains when everything else is stripped away. She turned back to Mercer, her eyes clear and direct. I don't know if I want children with you, Mercer. I don't know if we even have a future together, but I do know that I want the possibility to be real, based on choice rather than lies. The honesty was breathtaking, neither promise nor rejection, but a commitment to truth regardless of its emotional complications. I think that's all any of us can ask for, Mercer replied. The chance to make choices based on reality instead of deception. As they sat together in the fading afternoon light, Mercer realized they were building something new, not attempting to restore what had been lost, but creating a foundation of honesty that had never truly existed between them before. Whether that foundation would support reconciliation or an amicable parting remained uncertain, but the uncertainty itself felt like progress after months of pain and betrayal. The truth, however difficult, offered something neither of them had found in deception: the possibility of authentic connection, of choices made with clear eyes and full hearts. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet, perhaps not ever, but it was something equally valuable, a genuine beginning. By their third month in Cleveland, winter had descended in earnest. Snow blanketed the clinic grounds, transforming the research center into something resembling a postcard image, modern glass buildings gleaming against pristine white landscape. Inside these structures, amidst the quiet hum of medical technology, two parallel transformations were unfolding. Eleanor's progress exceeded even Dr. Abernathy's cautious projections. The experimental stem cell protocol, combined with targeted immunotherapy, had yielded results that bordered on remarkable. The most recent MRI showed significant reduction in lesion activity throughout her central nervous system, while her mobility assessments demonstrated measurable improvements in strength and coordination. I never promise miracles, Dr. Abernathy said during their joint consultation, his expression serious despite the encouraging news displayed on his tablet. But I believe in acknowledging meaningful progress. What we're seeing, Mrs. Bishop, is exactly that. Eleanor nodded, her composure betrayed only by the slight tremor in her hands. The fatigue is still significant, she noted pragmatically, and the right side weakness persists. Yes, the doctor agreed, this isn't a cure, but it's a substantial intervention in the disease process. The question now becomes whether we can maintain and build on these improvements with the next phase of treatment. For Mercer, watching Eleanor navigate her improving health was a study in controlled hope. She approached each small victory, walking unassisted for several minutes, managing buttons on her clothing, reading without visual distortion, with measured satisfaction rather than celebration. It was as if she were collecting evidence, building a case for optimism while remaining vigilant against disappointment. Mercer's own treatment followed a different but equally promising trajectory. The fertility specialists had identified the precise hormonal imbalance caused by his childhood illness. Not severe enough to cause complete sterility, but sufficient to significantly reduce viable sperm production. The targeted medication protocol had yielded steady improvements, with his most recent analysis showing near-normal parameters. "The final assessment looks excellent, Dr. Bishop," his specialist commented during their last scheduled appointment. "I see no reason why you couldn't father children naturally at this point, though I'd recommend continued monitoring for at least 6 months post-treatment." The confirmation brought a complex surge of emotions, validation, possibility, and a lingering anger toward Alan Reed, whose lie had shaped so many of their life decisions. Mercer had attempted to contact his former mentor twice during their time in Cleveland, seeking explanations or perhaps closure, but the calls had gone unanswered. Their medical progress, however significant, was matched by a more subtle evolution in their relationship. Forced proximity in an unfamiliar city, removed from the dynamics of their Westchester home, had created space for a different kind of interaction. They established routines that accommodated both their treatment schedules and their need for independent processing. Breakfast together in the clinic cafeteria, treatments and consultations throughout the day, then dinner in Eleanor's suite, or occasionally at one of the restaurants within walking distance of the medical campus. During these shared meals, they began rebuilding their communication, not as husband and wife trying to salvage a damaged marriage, but as two people attempting to understand each other without the accumulated assumptions of their past. "I never told you why I stopped writing," Eleanor said one evening as they shared Thai food in her room. "After my diagnosis." Mercer paused, chopsticks halfway to his mouth. Eleanor's academic work had been legendary in literary circles, insightful analyses of modernist fiction that had earned her tenure at a remarkably young age. Her abrupt cessation of publication following her diagnosis had seemed a natural consequence of her condition. "I assumed you needed to focus on your health," he replied carefully. "That was part of it," she acknowledged, setting aside her barely touched dinner. "But not the whole truth. I stopped because I was terrified of cognitive decline. I couldn't bear the thought of producing work that didn't meet my standards, of becoming a shadow of the scholar I'd been." The admission carried such raw vulnerability that Mercer felt momentarily breathless. How had they been married for 12 years without him understanding this essential fear? "Your cognition hasn't been affected," he observed gently. "No, but it could have been. That's the Russian roulette of MS, never knowing which function will be compromised next." She met his gaze directly. "I chose silence over potential mediocrity, academic death rather than intellectual decay." The painful honesty of her statement opened a door that had long been closed between them. Mercer found himself responding in kind, revealing the crushing weight of performing surgeries while his personal life imploded, the shame of colleagues' pitying glances, the fear that his medical judgment had been compromised by emotional turmoil. These conversations, halting at first, then increasingly fluid, continued throughout their final weeks in Cleveland. They shared regrets about opportunities missed, resentments long held silent, hopes that had seemed too fragile to voice. The disclosures weren't always comfortable, occasionally triggering defensive responses or painful realizations, but they established a foundation of authenticity that had been missing for years. As their scheduled departure approached, the question of what next loomed increasingly large. They would return to New York with improved health and clearer understanding, but without definitive plans for their future together or apart. "Dr. Abernathy wants me to continue the modified protocol in New York," Eleanor said during their final week, reviewing her discharge paperwork, monthly infusions, continuous monitoring. "There's a neurologist at Columbia who's participating in the extended trial." Mercer nodded, processing the information. "And your preference? Would you rather stay in Manhattan for easier access to Columbia or return to Westchester?" The question was practical, but loaded with implications about their living arrangements moving forward. Eleanor considered carefully before answering. "I think I'd like to return to the house initially. It's equipped for my needs, and Martha has agreed to come back part-time while I adjust to the new medication routine." "Of course," Mercer replied. ignoring the twinge of disappointment he felt. "The Manhattan apartment will remain available for as long as needed." A slight smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Actually, I was hoping you might consider moving back to the guest house. Not the main house," she clarified quickly, "but on the property, for convenience during this transition period." The invitation, limited as it was, surprised him. "Are you sure? After everything?" "I'm not suggesting reconciliation," Eleanor said with characteristic directness. "I'm proposing a practical arrangement that gives us both space while we determine next steps. My recovery requires careful monitoring. Your fertility treatment needs follow-up. Being in proximity without cohabitation seems medically sensible." The clinical framing was so quintessentially Eleanor that Mercer found himself smiling despite the seriousness of the conversation. She'd always approached emotional complexities through the lens of practical problem-solving. "I'd be amenable to that arrangement," he replied, matching her formal tone with a hint of humor, "provided clear boundaries are established." "Of course," she agreed, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing. "We're adults navigating a complex situation. I believe we're capable of defining appropriate parameters." Upon their return to New York in mid-January, they settled into a cautious new normal. Mercer moved into the guest house, resuming limited duties at Memorial Hospital while accompanying Eleanor to her follow-up appointments. Eleanor continued her promising response to treatment, gradually increasing her independent activities while maintaining realistic expectations about her recovery trajectory. Mercer's return to the hospital brought the uncomfortable reality of professional consequences back into sharp focus. Though his probation was nearing its conclusion, the tangible effects of the scandal lingered. Certain colleagues maintained a careful distance, conversations still occasionally halted when he entered rooms, and his surgical schedule remained lighter than before, filled with routine procedures rather than the complex cases that had once been his specialty. The most difficult adjustment was encountering Griffin Walsh in the hospital corridors. They had managed to avoid direct interaction in the weeks before Cleveland, but Mercer's first day back brought an unavoidable meeting in the physician's lounge. Griffin looked up from his coffee, momentarily freezing when he spotted Mercer. "You're back," he observed unnecessarily. "How was Cleveland?" The casual inquiry, as if they were merely colleagues discussing professional development rather than men whose lives had been catastrophically entangled, ignited something in Mercer that 3 months of therapy and reflection hadn't fully extinguished. "Illuminating," he replied, his tone deliberately neutral despite the anger simmering beneath, medically and otherwise. Griffin nodded uncomfortably, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "Eleanor's treatment was successful. Remarkably so," Mercer confirmed, filling his own coffee cup with deliberate slowness, "as was mine." A flicker of confusion crossed Griffin's face. "Yours? Were you ill?" "Not ill," Mercer clarified, turning to face his former friend directly. "Just misinformed about certain aspects of my health, a situation that's been corrected." Understanding dawned gradually in Griffin's expression, followed immediately by unease. "Misinformed how?" "It seems I'm not sterile after all," Mercer said conversationally, as if discussing an interesting case study. "Never was, according to specialists at Cleveland, which raises some interesting questions about Sage's pregnancy, doesn't it?" Griffin paled visibly, his coffee cup suspended halfway to his mouth. "Mercer, I don't think this is the appropriate—" "She sent Eleanor a letter," Mercer continued, maintaining the same casual tone, "with DNA results. Interesting reading." "Mercer, it wasn't your baby either, Griffin," Mercer finished, a grim satisfaction washing through him as he watched shock replace unease on his colleague's face. "Apparently we were both convenient covers for the actual father." Griffin set his cup down carefully, his hand visibly unsteady. "Who?" "Malcolm Reed." The name landed like a physical blow. Griffin actually took a step backward, his expression shifting rapidly from disbelief to comprehension. "Malcolm, that's not—" He stopped abruptly, clearly reassessing past interactions through this new lens. "Actually, that explains some things." "Doesn't it, though?" Mercer agreed, the anger now cooling into something more like pity. Despite everything, seeing Griffin's humiliation brought no real satisfaction. They had both been manipulated, both betrayed by people they trusted. "Does he know?" Griffin asked after a long silence. "About the baby?" "I'm not certain," Mercer admitted. But Eleanor sent copies of the DNA results to the hospital board last week. I imagine he'll be hearing from them shortly. Griffin's eyes widened. Eleanor sent... Why would she do that? The question revealed how little Griffin understood about his wife. Eleanor's measured response to betrayal was not absence of reaction but calculated justice. Systematic rather than emotional, precise rather than explosive. Because consequences should be proportional and appropriate, Mercer explained simply. My indiscretion with Sage cost me my reputation and nearly my career. Malcolm sat in judgment of that indiscretion while concealing his own. Eleanor believes in balance. As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Lisa Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression unusually grim. Emergency board meeting in 20 minutes, she announced to Griffin, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Mercer. Malcolm's requested immediate medical leave. You'll need to step in as interim chief of medicine. After she departed, Griffin turned to Mercer with dawning comprehension. Eleanor didn't just send the results to the board, did she? I believe Mrs. Reed received a copy as well, Mercer confirmed quietly, along with the ethics committee. Griffin exhaled slowly, processing the implications. Ruthless. Precise, Mercer corrected. Eleanor doesn't believe in collateral damage, but she does believe in accountability. The exchange marked a turning point in Mercer's professional reintegration. News of Malcolm Reed's abrupt leave and the rumors that inevitably followed shifted the hospital's attention away from Mercer's past indiscretions. Griffin, thrust into an administrative role he had coveted but wasn't prepared for, sought Mercer's guidance on several complex cases, a tentative professional rapprochement that acknowledged their shared experience of betrayal. By early March, with winter still holding firm outside their Westchester home, Mercer and Eleanor had established a functional coexistence that defied easy categorization. They weren't reconciled in the traditional sense. Mercer still slept in the guest house. They maintained separate daily routines, but neither were they proceeding toward divorce. Instead, they existed in a state of deliberate evaluation, assessing their individual healing and collective possibility with the same careful attention they gave to their medical treatments. One evening, as they shared dinner in the main house, Eleanor set aside her fork with uncharacteristic hesitation. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her expression carefully composed. About Sage. Mercer tensed involuntarily. Despite months of processing, the name still triggered a complex response: shame, anger, confusion. What about her? Her move to Seattle wasn't coincidental, Eleanor explained, nor was her subsequent relocation to Boston. Mercer set down his own utensils, suddenly alert to the careful precision in Eleanor's tone. What do you mean? I made some calls after she left, Eleanor admitted, called in some favors from academic colleagues, ensured that information about her ethical flexibility reached the appropriate hospital administrators. Understanding dawned slowly. You sabotaged her employment. I provided factual information to relevant parties, Eleanor corrected. Her departure from Seattle was her own choice, though perhaps influenced by the sudden frostiness of her reception there. Mercer stared at his wife, seeing her in a new light. The methodical intelligence that had made her a formidable scholar had been turned toward a different kind of problem-solving, one that involved precise calibration of consequences. Did you orchestrate the DNA test as well? He asked, pieces falling into place. Eleanor's expression remained neutral. I may have suggested to Sage that legal paternity would eventually require scientific verification, that Malcolm would likely demand testing before providing any support. And Malcolm's wife finding out? An anonymous letter with copies of hospital security footage showing them together, Eleanor acknowledged, no hint of remorse in her voice. Again, merely factual information that allowed Karina Reed to make informed decisions about her marriage. The systematic nature of Eleanor's revenge was breathtaking in its thoroughness. While Mercer had been reeling from betrayal, then focusing on healing in Cleveland, she had been methodically ensuring that everyone involved faced appropriate consequences for their actions. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Because I've finished. The accounts are balanced. Sage has lost her professional reputation, just as you temporarily lost yours. Griffin has the administrative position he wanted, but lacks the skills to succeed in it. Malcolm has lost his marriage, his position, and potentially his relationship with his legitimate children. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her water glass. and I need to know if this changes how you see me. If my capacity for calculated retribution disturbs you." The question was quintessentially Eleanor, direct, unflinching, seeking truth rather than comfort. Mercer considered carefully before responding. "I'm surprised," he admitted. "Not by your capability, but by the depth of anger it reveals. You've always seemed so controlled." "Control and absence of feeling aren't the same thing," Eleanor pointed out. "I felt everything. The humiliation, the betrayal, the rage. I simply chose to channel those emotions precisely rather than express them chaotically." Mercer nodded slowly, still processing this revelation. "Does it bring you satisfaction, knowing they've all suffered consequences?" "Not satisfaction," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "Closure, perhaps. The ability to move forward without feeling that injustice remains unaddressed." Her distinction was important. Not revenge for pleasure's sake, but for resolution, for the ability to proceed without the weight of unbalanced scales. "And have you?" Mercer asked quietly. "Moved forward?" The question hung between them, carrying implications beyond Eleanor's revenge plot. It addressed the fundamental uncertainty of their relationship status, the limbo they had occupied since returning from Cleveland. "I'm trying to," she said finally. "That's actually the other reason I wanted to have this conversation tonight." She reached for a folder that had been set aside on the dining table, opening it to reveal medical documents. "My latest results from Columbia. The treatment continues to show positive effects. Dr. Lawrence believes I'm one of the top responders in the extended trial." Mercer reviewed the data with professional attention, noting the continued reduction in inflammatory markers and promising signs of neural repair. "This is excellent, Eleanor." "It is," she agreed, "and your follow-up at Memorial shows continued normal fertility parameters." Which brings us to the question we've been avoiding since Cleveland. Mercer set the medical documents aside, focusing entirely on his wife's face. "Parenthood," Eleanor nodded. "We've established that it's physically possible now, for both of us. The question becomes whether it's something we want to pursue together." The directness of her statement took Mercer's breath away. After months of careful navigation around their relationship status, Eleanor had placed the ultimate question squarely on the table. "Together," he repeated, the word carrying enormous weight. "Are you suggesting reconciliation, Eleanor?" "I'm suggesting we've reached a decision point," she replied carefully. "We've been in this intermediate state for months, not divorced, not fully married, assessing and evaluating. At some point we need to determine a direction." She was right, of course. Their current arrangement couldn't continue indefinitely. The guest house was never meant to be a permanent residence. Their careful interactions, while healing in many ways, lacked the clarity of either committed reconciliation or definitive separation. "What do you want, Eleanor?" Mercer asked, realizing it was perhaps the most important question he'd ever posed to her. Eleanor took a deep breath, her composed exterior momentarily revealing the vulnerability beneath. "I want honesty, completely this time. No protected secrets, no comfortable lies, no strategic omissions." "That isn't answering my question," Mercer noted gently. "Because I don't have a simple answer," she admitted. "I don't know if I can trust you again the way a wife should trust her husband. I don't know if the damage we've both sustained can be fully repaired." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I do know that these past months, especially in Cleveland, I felt more genuinely connected to you than perhaps at any point in our marriage. The conversations we've had, the truths we've shared, there's value in that connection that I'm reluctant to discard. It wasn't a declaration of enduring love or commitment to reconciliation. It was something more tentative, but perhaps more honest. An acknowledgement of real connection amid the wreckage of betrayal and deception." "I feel the same way," Mercer said quietly. "The honesty between us now. It's different from what we had before. More difficult sometimes, but more real." Eleanor nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "So perhaps that's our starting point, not attempting to rebuild what we had, which was based partly on misconceptions and omissions, but creating something new, something with integrity at its foundation." "And parenthood?" Mercer asked, returning to her original question. "Is that something you want to consider as part of this new construction?" Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. "I think I do. Not immediately. We both need more time to heal to establish this new relationship. But yes, eventually." The acknowledgement sparked something in Mercer's chest, not the desperate hope of keeping Eleanor through their crisis, nor the fantasy escape Sage had represented, but something steadier and more profound, the possibility of building a family based on truth rather than convenience or deception. "I'd like that," he said simply. "When we're ready, if we get there." Eleanor reached across the table, offering her hand, a gesture both small and monumental. Mercer took it, feeling the strength in her grip despite the lingering effects of her condition. "I can't promise you forgiveness on any particular timeline," she said, her eyes holding his steadily. "And I won't pretend the pain of betrayal has disappeared, but I am willing to walk forward and see where this path leads us." It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation of romantic films, nor the clean break of definitive divorce. It was messy, complicated, tentative, a commitment to process rather than outcome. But as Mercer held his wife's hand across their dining table, he recognized that this uncertain path contained something their previous marriage had often lacked: authentic connection based on who they truly were, not who they pretended to be. Outside, winter was reluctantly giving way to early spring, the first crocuses pushing through the snow-covered ground of their garden. Inside, a different kind of renewal was cautiously emerging, not the restoration of what was lost, but the careful cultivation of something potentially stronger, growing from the rich soil of painful truth. 3 years later, the autumn light filtered through the trees surrounding the Bishop's Westchester property, casting dappled shadows across the renovated backyard. What had once been a formal garden was now a more practical space, still beautiful, but designed with new priorities in mind. A gently sloping ramp replaced the old stone steps. Wide, smooth pathways accommodated Eleanor's mobility needs on days when walking was difficult. And in the center, a colorful playground set stood ready for small hands and adventurous hearts. Eleanor Bishop sat on the back porch, marking student essays with the same precision that had made her renowned in academic circles before her illness. Her return to teaching, part-time at first, then gradually increasing to a modified full schedule, had been one of many calculated risks over the past 3 years. The experimental treatment from Cleveland, continued through Columbia's extended trial, had stabilized her condition to a degree once thought impossible. While not a cure, it had transformed her prognosis from rapid decline to managed chronic condition. She looked up at the sound of laughter from the yard, where Mercer was attempting to demonstrate proper baseball grip to their 18-month-old daughter. Olivia Jane Bishop had her father's dark hair and her mother's analytical gaze, a combination that already suggested the formidable person she might become. "She's holding it upside down," Eleanor called, setting aside her work. Mercer glanced up with a grin. "She has her own technique, very avant-garde." Eleanor smiled, watching as their daughter promptly put the small plastic ball in her mouth instead. The path to Olivia's existence had been neither simple nor straightforward. After their tentative decision to explore parenthood, they had spent another full year rebuilding their relationship foundation before even beginning to try. The pregnancy itself had been carefully managed, with Eleanor's neurologist and maternal fetal medicine specialists collaborating throughout. Mercer gathered Olivia into his arms and climbed the porch steps, the easy confidence of his movements belying the complexity of their journey. He had returned fully to surgery 2 years ago, though his practice now included more teaching and research than before, a deliberate rebalancing of priorities rather than a consequence of past scandal. "Academia's newest critic appears to be done with sports for the day," he announced, transferring their drooling daughter to Eleanor's waiting arms. "Just like her mother," Eleanor observed dryly. "Athletics were never my strong suit." As if to contradict this statement, she stood smoothly from her chair, balancing Olivia on her hip with practiced ease. The walking stick that had once been a constant necessity now leaned unused against the wall, needed only on particularly difficult days. Their path to this moment, a family intact, a future with genuine hope, had been neither inevitable nor easy. The year following their Cleveland treatments had been filled with careful negotiation of boundaries, painful honesty about lingering resentments, and gradual rebuilding of trust. Mercer had moved from the guest house back to the main house only after 6 months of what amounted to an extended courtship, intentional dates, explicit conversations about expectations, and a commitment to radical transparency that sometimes left them both raw and exhausted. They had considered traditional marriage counseling, but ultimately found their own approach: monthly recalibration dinners where no topic was off limits, where grievances could be aired without fear of retaliation, where they assessed their progress with the same clarity they brought to Eleanor's medical treatments. Inside the house, as Eleanor settled Olivia for her afternoon nap, Mercer retrieved the mail from the foyer table. Among the usual correspondence was a thick envelope bearing a Boston postmark and unfamiliar handwriting. He set it aside until Eleanor rejoined him in the kitchen. "This came today," he said, sliding the envelope toward her. "The return address is a law firm in Boston." Eleanor examined it with academic curiosity before carefully opening it. Inside was a formal letter accompanied by several legal documents. "It's from Sage," she said, scanning the contents. "Or rather, her attorney. She's relinquishing any future claims against your estate and acknowledging that her previous assertions regarding your paternity of her child were knowingly false." Mercer took the documents, reading them with increasing confusion. "Why now? After all this time?" "Apparently she's getting married," Eleanor continued, reviewing a second page. "Her fiancé is adopting her son, and they wanted to ensure there were no legal complications." The news landed with surprising gentleness. 3 years ago, Sage's name alone had been enough to trigger a cascade of painful emotions. Now she felt like a character from a book they had both read long ago, significant to the story, but no longer immediately relevant to their lives. "There's something else," Eleanor added, extracting a handwritten note from the envelope. "A personal letter, to both of us." Mercer hesitated, uncertain whether reopening this chapter served any purpose. "Do you want to read it?" Eleanor considered briefly before nodding. "I think we should, for closure if nothing else." The letter was shorter than the legal documents, written in the flowing script Mercer remembered from medication labels and care notes. "Mercer and Eleanor, I understand this letter may be unwelcome and you have every right to discard it unread. If you've gotten this far, thank you for that small grace. I'm getting married next month to someone who knows the full truth about my past and loves me anyway. James is a good man, better than I deserved after what I did to both of you. He's adopting David as his son, which prompted the legal documents enclosed. I won't ask for forgiveness. What I did was calculated and cruel, manipulating people who had shown me nothing but professional respect and personal kindness. There's no justification for that behavior, only explanation. I was desperate, selfish, and convinced I deserved more than life had given me. What I will say is that the consequences of my actions, consequences you ensured I faced, Eleanor, forced me to confront parts of myself I had spent a lifetime avoiding. The professional doors that closed, the reputation that followed me, the isolation that resulted, they were painful but necessary catalysts for change. David is 3 now, healthy and curious about everything. Malcolm has never met him and never will if I have any say. Griffin occasionally sends child support but has no contact. It's better this way. I don't expect this letter to change anything between us. I simply wanted you to know that your suffering wasn't entirely in vain. It forced at least one person in this tangled web to become better than she was. With respect and regret, Sage Morgan Eleanor set the letter down carefully, her expression thoughtful. Interesting. That's your take? Mercer asked, surprised by her mild reaction. I'm not sure what the appropriate response is, she admitted. Satisfaction that she's acknowledged her wrongdoing. Anger that she has the audacity to contact us at all. Curiosity about how her life has unfolded. Mercer understood her uncertainty. The emotions associated with Sage and that period of their lives had been processed so thoroughly, revisited from so many angles, that this unexpected contact felt almost anticlimactic. I find I don't really care what happens to her, he realized aloud. Not from bitterness, but because she's simply not relevant to our lives anymore. Eleanor nodded, gathering the documents to file away. That's probably the healthiest response. She was a catalyst for change in our marriage, painful, destructive change, but ultimately transformative. It was true. Without the earthquake of betrayal and its aftershocks, they might never have confronted the fundamental dishonesty that had undermined their relationship from the beginning, might never have discovered the depth of connection possible when pretense was stripped away, might never have created the authentic partnership that now sustained them through the complexities of parenthood and Eleanor's ongoing health management. Do you ever wonder about the others? Mercer asked as they moved to the living room, listening for any sounds from Olivia's monitor. Malcolm? Griffin? Occasionally, Eleanor admitted, settling beside him on the sofa. Malcolm divorced and relocated to Arizona, last I heard. His wife took him for quite a substantial settlement. Griffin's still at Memorial, Mercer added. Stepped down from the administrative role after the first year. He specializes in pediatric oncology now. The information was factual rather than emotional. Updates on characters who had once dominated their narrative, but now existed primarily at its margins. Does it bother you? Eleanor asked suddenly. Working in the same hospital as Griffin after everything that happened? Mercer considered the question thoughtfully. Not anymore. We're cordial when we encounter each other. Professional. Neither of us has any interest in revisiting the past. A soft cry from the baby monitor interrupted their conversation. Eleanor moved to stand, but Mercer touched her arm gently. I'll go, he said. You've been grading papers for hours. As he climbed the stairs toward their daughter's room, Mercer reflected on how thoroughly their priorities had shifted. His career, once the defining element of his identity, now existed in careful balance with his roles as husband and father. Eleanor's academic work had resumed its importance in her life, but within boundaries that protected her health and family time. Most significantly, the reflexive dishonesty that had characterized their early marriage, the small omissions and convenient untruths that had eventually created chasms between them, had been replaced by a commitment to uncomfortable honesty. They had learned through terrible pain and patient rebuilding that authentic connection required the courage to be fully seen, flaws and all. In Olivia's room, Mercer found his daughter standing in her crib, tear tracks on her flushed cheeks, but a bright smile appearing at the sight of him. Bad dream? He asked, lifting her into his arms. She nodded solemnly before tucking her head against his shoulder, little fingers grasping the fabric of his shirt with complete trust. As he soothed her back to sleep, singing softly the lullabies his own mother had once sung to him, Mercer caught sight of their reflection in the nursery mirror, father and daughter, legacy and future, connection unbroken, despite the fractures that had threatened to destroy everything he valued. The image reminded him of something Eleanor had said during one of their most difficult conversations in that first tentative year of reconciliation. Perhaps the Japanese have it right with kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The breaks aren't hidden, they're highlighted, honored as part of the object's history. The piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken. Their marriage, like those repaired vessels, bore visible traces of its fracturing. The memories of betrayal, the scars of Eleanor's calculated revenge, the ongoing vigilance required to maintain trust, these would always be part of their story. But the gold that now held them together, radical honesty, hard-won wisdom, deliberate choice rather than convenience or obligation, created something stronger and more valuable than what had existed before. As Olivia drifted back to sleep, Mercer gazed at their reflection and saw not the shattered fragments of a life he had nearly destroyed, but the carefully reconstructed future he had been granted the chance to build, imperfect, requiring constant attention, and infinitely precious. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.